I'm Chad Wolf. I'm the Director of Risk and Compliance for AWS. And today we're going to have a session with these four companies, as well as Jody on my team is going to talk about compliance in financial sector. We've got Dwolla, Finra, Robinhood, and Capital One presenting today. Their sessions will be about a 8 to 10 minute flash talk, followed by Jody. The purpose of this is just to help share some of the experiences in moving complex or regulatory complex or audited sensitive workloads to the cloud. And we've got some really great experience from these four companies and some really good thought leadership from Jody on this topic. After this session, there's going to be a reception, like a networking reception, in the room right next to us. And that will be a chance for you to come talk to these presenters and Jody and other members of the team, ask questions about what you've heard and other questions as needed. So we won't have a Q&A session for this particular 55-minute session, but you will have an opportunity to ask those questions in the next room. So I'm going to first off pass it over to Tony Spinelli from Cap One. Tony.
Thanks, Chad. Certainly thrilled to be here to talk about this topic. It's really been a positive and really kind of a long journey for us, and truly getting to the right compliance, the right security, and the right model for us has been a heck of a journey. It feels like almost deja vu being here a year ago, and where we were and where we were going. So I think we got a slide here or two. That's me. I'm not the CIO, but maybe someday. Give it a shot. For those of you that have heard what's in my wallet, or you've tried to watch sports commercial free, it's nearly impossible, I know, with Capital One. I think we sponsor nearly everything at this point, so apparently the marketing's working well. What's in your wallet? We are the largest direct bank, the fourth largest credit card issuer. I think we're well known for that. Tremendous amount of accounts, services, large associates, and a Fortune 500 company. These are the services that we use in AWS, EC2, ELB, RDS. A lot of security activities going on, and had a lot of things to accomplish, from both making sure we felt comfortable about security in the cloud, that our regulators felt comfortable about what we're doing, and from being a customer at Capital One myself is, are we doing the right things for our customers and company to drive great confidence in the way that we drive security and compliance in the cloud, as well as freedom of action for them to use the services and digital products that we're creating every day to drive great customer experiences, and that's really what it's about for us. So we certainly, from a how did we do it perspective, took a lot of time around the due diligence aspect of it. We looked at a governance model and standards and playbook, and then we really moved towards what I would call a security by design mentality in everything we did. Whether it was security, technology, really focusing on, in-house developed tools, great third parties, and then extreme collaboration. I mean this sincerely, extreme collaboration with, key leaders at AWS, as well as in the regulatory world. We really wanted to do things side saddle with our regulators. We had them in a lot of our discussions. We did the opposite of probably what many folks that are highly regulated did, was, the old model of, well, let's try to figure it out and be super smart and be super compliant and super secure, and then we'll tell people how we did it, and we'll hope that we met all the requirements we should do. We didn't do that. We actually had them there with us, throughout the journey, and we communicated probably not only overtly, but we had them there in the room with us on, here's what we believe. What do you think? What's your feedback? Are we doing the right things? Does this feel good to you? Does something feel unnatural here? And that's what you always got to think about when you're thinking about compliance and security, because a lot of us have been doing this for a long time, and it's always the gut of, is this unnatural? Does it feel right? Are we doing the right things? So we did a lot of due diligence, even at the beginning. And, it's almost like, being here a year ago and coming back a year now, we started the journey in AWS in the cloud with dev, with test. But after being here last year in this very room, I think, we said, look, we're going to go prod cloud, and we're going to do it in a world-class way. So one of the things that we set out to do is we're going to build our own cloud security and cloud compliance organization, and it's going to be world-class. And we're going to hire the best people in the world anywhere they are and bring them to Capital One. I can say since January of this year, we've hired 112, and we're hiring about 40 people a month. Talent. Talent is your differentiator. If you're going to do this right, you have to have the best people in the world if you're going to do it in a very highly regulated way, a very compliance way, in a very focused way of security. So we're very, very serious about that. So along that journey, without having the right talent, we felt that was the job zero. Let's make sure we have the best minds in the world that are thinking about cloud in the new way, in the new future. Because we really believe that security and compliance in the future is going to be run out of cloud, right? It's not going to be run out of data centers. I don't think, data centers is going to go probably the way of the industrial era where, everyone was building their own power, right? Well, I think data centers are going to be led by companies like Amazon Web Services, right? That can do it in a real world-class way and secure, that backplane, secure that physical side, and then you provide the mechanisms for compliance and security on top of it. So when we think about compliance, we thought of it in terms of continuous compliance, is how do we really drive real-time activities and real-time telemetry? And that's one of the great things about the cloud is, as soon as NetFlow was available, we jumped all over that. And we started grabbing telemetry on everything we did. Not just state, but we actually looked at everything that changes. And you can do that in AWS. You can see what's changing. You can really see what's happening in your environment, because so many times, for those of us that have done this a very long time, sometimes you're guessing about what's in your data center, right? Right? We're hoping we know every change and every activity that someone's done in that data center, but with the cloud, and the words we use around Capital One is, if done right, you can actually see everything that you're doing. You can understand your assets, you can understand where they are, you can understand state, and you can have a great focus on what those changes are. When we think about monitoring, we thought of ourselves more like DevOps, is how do we take advantage of SNS and SQS, right? Understanding what are the notifications we need, what are the queuing services that are happening, and monitoring that in real time. Now, we use some third-party tools and products, but what we're doing at Capital One, and we have been doing for years, we've been building our own systems. And you have to really think about security and compliance in a completely different way than you have in the past. If you don't have developers in your compliance and security organization, you should rethink that. They have to be there. You have to have that development capability, or things like DevOps or developing code in the cloud, you'll be behind. So that's one of the things that really helped us is we thought of ourselves very, very similar to those organizations, and we did a massive amount of hiring of developers that could not only code, but could understand security, code, and telemetry and get the data that we needed. Thinking more about compliance, we took the perspective of let's encrypt everything. Let's lay this stuff across like peanut butter so we can be really unassailable about how we think about our customers' most important data. Because you understand how it is in data centers, you can't always encrypt everything because of latency and a non-infinite scalability, right? But with ELB, we can. We can scale infinitely on what we're doing. So if we have a concern about latency or how that encryption is running, we can add more power to it, right? So we encrypt everything that we do in the cloud from an encryption perspective. We're also looking at really doubling down on that era. We've actually built our own tokenization engine. So for things like PII or data that we feel needs to be secured even more, we're actually putting in place our own tokenization system for the cloud that we've built. We're probably going to open source it and we're looking to open source a ton of the cloud activities that we're developing. And we really have that mindset of not thinking in terms of servers anymore, and this is also important for your customers in your lines of business about how they think, is getting them to think not so much about is the server compliant, but is the software compliant, right? Is the software running in the way you want it to, and is the data doing the things that you want it to do? It's no more, the server is the asset, right? You have to think about it as software, and the service is really the new asset. I think one of the real big challenges for us when we thought about, how we're running data centers and the vulnerabilities and compliance with vulnerabilities that we have is it's almost an impossible place to get to zero vulnerabilities, right? It's a challenge. You've got multiple vendors, multiple technologies. You're constantly chasing the next vulnerability and the next patch cycle, right? And you know what it's like to go through that process, right? Where we're staging, we're testing, we're dropping servers, we're bringing them back up. Well, that's one of the things that we found to be wonderful for us when we moved to the cloud and thought about compliance and compliance security is we can really look at patch management in a very different way and vulnerability management in a different way. If we don't like that vulnerability, we just delete it, right? We just delete that instance and bring up a fully patched instance. So that's been one of our, greatest, besides encryption, our greatest opportunities for us was to really move to a place where we can think of vulnerability and patch management in an extremely different way. And then identity management. I think identity management is something that you have to do right from the beginning, is really understand, who and what is happening with all of your instances and who has the ability to really, bring instances up and down and make changes to those things and limit it to, the fewest people you can. And you almost have to think about identity management 4 years from now, right? Just because of how that works is understanding what structure do you want to have in place and thinking about a real governance model around identity and access management before you just start going out and granting access and efforts around that. And then I think one of the last things that we've really focused on in the compliance area is around CMDB, configuration management, and how we think about auto-scaling in our security kits. We've really gotten to a place where all of our security kit, the way we want it to operate, fully auto-scales. And when we go back to and you measure each one of these things about the way you've done it before, it's just drastically simpler, and it gives you much more assurance when you're doing it in a way that's fully controlled and fully automated. I think where we're at in our journey around compliance and security is we believe we've made some really groundbreaking achievements in compliance and security to improve it. But what I think we're really looking for in the next stage is how do we get to self-service and how do we get to automation for what we're doing around security and compliance? So when this change happens or this activity happens, how does that automatically spawn without a human intervention the right thing that you want it to do so that you stay in compliance? Whereas in the non-cloud world, it's always someone chasing another issue or chasing another problem or figuring out, how do you, bring something back into compliance. We really want compliance to be thought of as continuous, self-service, and fully automated. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Tony. I'm Daniel Schaefer. I am a team lead of the DevOps team at Dwolla. And if you don't know what Dwolla is, we're just a little payments company still. We process payments over the internet, basically with no transaction fees. And a lot of times people will ask right away, well, what does that really mean? Where's your money come from? What does that mean for us? There's three things to make it clear. To the consumer, it's easy, it's retail, paid peer-to-peer, peer-to-business. But the real value proposition comes in for businesses and financial institutions. For businesses, we provide services and controls to navigate the payment system to make it simpler for them. And so they pay us for providing that value to them. And for financial institutions, we provide faster payments connections. So through our FiSync service, anything on the network can send money to anything else on the network in near real time. And that's basically what we do. And that's the real value proposition, that we get the nice consumer side for free. In terms of what we kind of went wholly into Amazon about a year ago. We made the leap to pretty much move most of our infrastructure to Amazon. At the time, we tried to do as much of it in a repeatable fashion as possible. A lot of it started with just basic CloudFormation templates and things like that. And so we had some things that were repeatable, but we didn't have a lot of automation behind it yet. Over the last year, we've evolved that much closer to what we're considering the ideal that Tony talked about, which is both the combination of code as infrastructure as paired up with automation. And that's a continual process, and it will continue to be a process that I think most companies will build on as time goes on. But it's something that we've made huge strides just in the last year. In terms of what we've accomplished in terms of the regulated workflows and some of the things, it touches right on some of the stuff that Tony was hitting on as well about strong authentication and identity access management were the two of the main points. We know who's in the system, we can validate who they are, we can guarantee that those controls are in place before anybody's touching our infrastructure in a meaningful way. We can control the roles and groups in a fairly simple but yet robust policy management system to make sure that you know who has what powers within your system. And the third piece is the system itself and what can talk to pieces in the system. That's where segmentation comes in. The isolation of the resources that we set up through creating VPCs across various environments so that there's no lateral movement from things in dev being able to talk to anything in higher level environments all the way up through prod, and having established routes for those systems and communications into the various VPCs, and even across regions as you talk about disaster recovery and things like that. So when you talk about how we do it, I kind of think about it in terms of three sides. The first side is the people side, which is more philosophy, that we need to make real changes that are meaningful and not just do lip service to auditors. Bringing in the regulators to actually talk to them, that's a really awesome way to collaborate and get real changes in your organization that are going to be both helpful to you in terms of security and compliance, as well as those auditors feeling better. Kind of what Chris talked about in the last session was, how do you bridge that gap between the compliance officers and auditors, knowing even what it means to audit and be compliant in the cloud? I think all those things are really valuable to bring all those in. So that the theory and that philosophy is very important, because that's what builds your organization in terms of what practices you build in. The second side is, to me, the product management side. The product management side, to me, is taking all of these disparate compliance things that you want to build into your process, whether that's SOC 2 or any various NIST. We piece all those together and build our own internal document that says this is our internal set of controls that we're going to build to, and treat it just like any other feature set. We need to build to this. These are features that we care about, and we're going to patch them and fix them and keep track of these the same as we would any other feature set that we build on our platform. And the last piece, the piece that obviously as a developer that I get most excited about too, is the infrastructure as code. And the part that I didn't put up the slide I think is really important too, is pairing that up with the automation side. Is the amount that you can get from this is even hard to discount, because infrastructure as code is a philosophy of how do you build those things, how do you build a pipeline that allows you to have every piece go through the same change cycle that you would have for any other piece of software that you build. And I think as we move towards that ideal, Amazon has provided a lot of great tools to make this easy. We still drive it via CloudFormation, but the workflow itself, we have an executor. We use Jenkins to fire stuff off. It can be anything you want, really, but you just need something to start the process, and something that usually can be automated by time, automated, or push button, whatever you need to fire off the various pieces of the infrastructure. The second side of that pipeline really is there's three pieces that are all code-based, which is the code that builds the CloudFormation template, which is provided through libraries that are out there in various languages. The chef recipes that you use to orchestrate the instances you're building to establish what they look like, getting the latest AMI so you can be patched prior to ever having to worry about patching again, because every time you redeploy, you have the newest patch in place because you've pre-baked all that stuff. And the third piece is the app code itself. And so our pipeline runs all of that stuff through together, packages it up, and dumps them into S3. So not only do we have an established set of code, all three of those pieces of code can have gone through the normal process of code review and establish what's going on with that, but they're all stuck in S3 together so that we can go back and say, well, what did that instance look like? Why does it look that way? All three of those sections of code are auditable, both internally as a development organization as well as to anyone external. It provides an excellent pipeline for all of these pieces. And I think that's the reality of all this, to wrap it all up. The key to compliance is to make it simple as humanly possible, and take as much of the pieces out. So even within that pipeline, some of those things we have abstractions on. Literally now, because most of our services are built the same way, and we know we need the same sets of security and stuff built in, we have an abstraction built onto that. So most of the code, we don't even write most code now to build CloudFormation scripts. It's like 15 lines of config. That config gets fired into our own tool that produces the code for CloudFormation. And now what used to be automation is you click a button, some stack.json file that's included in a repo somewhere has all of the configuration for the infrastructure in it, and you're done. It fires it through the same pipeline. And that's the key. It's repeatable, it's compliant, because you take all the human pieces out of it. You know you can audit it as you go through every single section of the organization, and you can build better and better systems over time because all of it is code, and you're always fixing the code just like you would any other piece of the system. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Miles from Robinhood. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Daniel. Hi, everyone. I'm Miles Wellesley. I am head of business development at Robinhood. Robinhood is a registered broker-dealer with Finra and the SEC. So our mission at Robinhood is to democratize access to financial markets and to build a financial services platform that really re-engages and engages a new generation of investors for the first time. So a few of the ways we do that is we do that from removing friction from the trading experience. One of those frictions that we remove are commissions. Another friction are our account minimums. And finally, we spend a lot of time thinking about how we designed our product, both on the front end and how we designed the systems that we use to support this clean front end on the back end. So we spend just a lot of time working on design, period, as a company. And so we were really proud that in the last year we won the 2015 Apple Design Award, and we're one of the first financial services firms to win that. So again, just incredibly important to us that we design a product that's easy to use, and for the end customer, the end user experience is very simple, that the app itself is easy to use and surfaces the relevant information that's necessary. And so I've talked a little bit about the front end, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the back end. So as a startup, we launched back in March of this year, and at the time we had about 1 million on our wait list. Since then, we've brought on hundreds of thousands of people onto our platform. We've saved our customers over $22 million in commissions, over $1 billion in transactions have occurred on the platform. And this kind of scaling just would not be possible without AWS and cloud services. So here you can see we use 18 different services within AWS. So again, it's been critical to our own growth, and being able to leverage AWS with our current team and our current resources has been just a huge part of enabling us to grow at the pace that we have and to remain compliant as we've done that. So I want to talk a little bit about a few specific examples related to our compliance workflows that have really helped us gain an edge, and some workflows that really would not be possible without AWS. The first one is around document retention and account review. So when you sign up for a Robinhood account, you go onto our platform, and we've designed and optimized our sign-up flow where it takes less than 4 minutes to sign up for this brokerage account. You give us your information, we compare it to a consumer database, and our system says, oh, we can't verify your date of birth. So then our systems will then reach out and prompt the customer to upload a version of their driver's license, and we'll then have that document up straight into S3, uploaded directly from the user's device in a secure way. And so we have the ability to associate all this documentation with these user profiles. And so our compliance team and our registered principals, when they're reviewing these brokerage accounts, can optimize their time in a way where they can view all the relevant documentation in real time very easily and accessible from our internal dashboard systems. Again, a huge help there. You've heard everyone here today talk about this. Security is just paramount to everything you do. If you're a broker-dealer and you're a startup especially, it's always just incredibly important that you go above and beyond with security. There's some very nice baked-in features to AWS services like IAM that allow us to limit the scopes of permissions, to track who does what with what systems, to manage how systems communicate with each other. That's just been incredibly helpful. We've also built our own tokenization proprietary system on top of that to manage encryption at a higher level. But again, can't reiterate this enough at how important security is. Redundancy and business continuity. We take backups of our systems, we take snapshots of our systems. We need the ability to restore our systems and restore every little bit of information at any given time, and we need that information available to us. And so, obviously, AWS has been a huge part of that. So we haven't run into any problems, and we know that our systems are recoverable and available at all times. Finally, something that's really important to us, and something that we've really worked hard on, is combating fraud and identifying money laundering type behavior on our systems. With a team of 40 individuals, we have a few data scientists who can dedicate their time to writing queries and surfacing the relevant information that's necessary to help us take a proactive stance towards combating fraud and money laundering type behavior on our platforms and identifying that behavior in real time. Versus going out as a startup and trying to recruit an entire data science infrastructure team to run that system, we can then find the best and the brightest data scientists to work and help us build dashboards that plug in beautifully into Redshift and help us to rid ourselves of any money laundering or fraudulent activity on the platform. So for us, it's really been about being able to leverage all of these services that work very well together with a limited team and been able to scale to support a huge number of customers in a little bit amount of time. And that just wouldn't be possible without AWS. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk to you today, and look forward to speaking with a few of you at the reception later. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nikki Sonpar. Excuse me while I get organized here. And I'm the Director of Data Platforms at Finra. So probably one of the first questions you have is, who is Finra? Finra is the largest financial regulator in the United States. We cover the vast majority of equities and options, as you see above here. We have a huge storage requirement, and we process a tremendous amount of events per day. Today I'm going to talk about one aspect about what Finra does, and that is the ability to receive documents in a secure and compliant fashion. Okay, so in Finra we call that intake. So what is intake? Intake is the ability for Finra to request documents from broker-dealers. You can imagine what these documents are. These are trades that have been executed. They could be account information. They could be any kind of document that we need in order to do our job. We're talking about millions of documents, and we're talking about gigabytes of data. You're talking about Excel spreadsheets, PDFs. In the case of advertising, they could even be multimedia files that we receive. Files could be up to 100 gigabytes, and we're also experiencing very large growth as systems are becoming more modern, as broker-dealers are becoming more modern. They're capable of sending us this information electronically faster, better. One of the key things that Finra has to do is to regulate. And in order to regulate, sometimes you have to take that all the way to litigation. In those cases, you need to be able to trace the submission from the firm, who looked at it, who did what are the resulting documents. So auditability is a key part of intake. So what are the requirements that we had? Our first and foremost requirements is we wanted to centralize the data. We have many different applications, all receiving data in different ways, different formats. We wanted to centralize it and put it into a unified data catalog. We wanted to leverage proven cloud services. We wanted to leverage network infrastructure. We wanted to leverage storage. We wanted to leverage security that was already available. We also, as part of our compliance, we needed to manage the encryption. We couldn't just take encryption that was handed to us and accept it. We had to customize it and build it in a way that would satisfy our compliance needs. And finally, as part of the intake growth, we wanted to stay true to our mission. We wanted to make sure that we focused on the added value of receiving the data, analyzing the data, and reporting on the data, instead of worrying about the complexities about scaling and growing at those kinds of rates. So what did we do? We built something called the large file service. The key technology pillars behind large file services are S3, KMS, which is Key Management Service, and IAM, Identity Access Management. This large file solution enables firms to directly upload, which means we're leveraging the network infrastructure that's provided to us by AWS and put it directly into an S3 bucket in a well-defined location for a limited period of time. The data is always encrypted from the moment it leaves the broker-dealer, in transit, and finally into persistent storage. And we wanted to leverage something called the Unified Data Catalog. The Unified Data Catalog is a capability to store metadata about the file we received. Things like which firm sent it to us, the size of the file, the type of the file. So all of that is stored as part of the upload process when it comes into Finra. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So what did we learn? First and foremost, if you take nothing else out of today, when you start designing your system, make sure you include your security team. Decisions about encryption, whether you do your own encryption or use some of the encryption services that are provided by AWS, your bucket policies, all of these will have very large effects on how compliant your system is and will have effect on your customers. So from day one, make sure you engage the AWS SMEs and make sure you engage your compliance team. Secondly, I mentioned a few minutes ago that we only allow uploads into a specific location for a specific time. Now, with very large uploads, gigabytes, that could take some time depending upon network bandwidth, so on and so forth. So one of the things we had to learn how to do was to refresh tokens while uploads were in flight. That was one of the challenges we faced. Third thing that I'd like to make sure that everyone is aware of and think about when you're building your solution is where are your objects stored and are you going to go across multiple access zones? KMS today does not do key replication across access zones. So if today you wanted to do that, you have to think long and hard about it. Now, to give credit to the AWS team, it's on their roadmap, and I know it's coming very soon. But if you're going to launch today, it's something you need to consider. Finally, one thing I'm very grateful to our ProServe team. They worked with us throughout the entire process. They were very helpful, and they really helped us come up to a solution that made sense and worked for all of us. So what is the future? So right now we have the ability to upload, but we now want to move all our current documentation, at least 5 years worth, into S3 and Glacier. Secondly, we want to leverage the unified data cabinet. If you recall, I said that as part of the upload process, we store metadata about the attachment into this unified data catalog. So now this opens up opportunities. You can start asking, tell me, for this firm, can you show me all the documents they uploaded in the last 2 years? Before the unified data cabinet, that would be a very hard question to answer. For certain types of financial filings, we can do analysis across, for a given equity across multiple firms. Again, prior to the unified data catalog, that was very hard to do. Finally, as part of the intake platform, now that we're migrating a lot of documents, the next part is to move up the intake platforms that we have and the intake applications into the cloud. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce Jody Scrifani from AWS.
Thank you, Nikki. And thank you, everyone. That's some great stuff in compliance. So I'm Jody Scrifani. I'm the Global Financial Services Compliance Strategist for AWS. And let me tell you a little bit about my background. So I spent almost 10 years at Finra. We conveniently did that so he could give me that great introduction. I ran a market surveillance program there. Then I went to the New York Stock Exchange to develop a program for regulation SCI, which you know it is now today, but it used to be called ARP. And then I went to JP Morgan to run an examination program. And in hindsight of looking at my transition from more of a compliance role to coming to a technology company like AWS, one of the first things that come to my mind was my experience with the flash crash, which was May 6, 2010. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the flash crash, though I'm pretty sure most of you remember that day, because it was Mother's Day weekend, and a lot of us didn't get the opportunity to enjoy Mother's Day, but whatever, I digress. And the day for the time period for me was incredibly stressful because that meant we were going to have to analyze millions of market events, and we were going to end up doing this over Excel. And we were going to do this on limited resources. So when our surveillance were run, we had to wait until our surveillance was run. We had to wait until the resource was available. And then we were going to analyze it through pivot tables. But now, today, if you look at what Finra and the SEC are doing, the SEC actually ran that same day through TradeWorks on AWS, and they did it in 2.8 seconds. Yeah. So I want my time back, first of all, because I kind of feel gypped. But I'm a little bit of a compliance geek. So when I hear that makes me excited for all my friends who are still at Finra, and for everybody just in the AWS environment in terms of compliance, because having that ability, it's incredible. But you can't do that. You can't come to AWS unless you start embracing your compliance team and your auditors. Sure, you could. But as everyone here has talked about, that's so important. Just getting that yes and that excitement from your audit team and compliance, I assure you that can be done because I come from that environment, and I'm so excited to see what AWS is doing in this space. So what are some of the concerns with moving to cloud for financial services? If you think data protection, you're talking about you have full control at AWS over your environment in terms of security. Your corporate governance, we have a number of resources. My favorite happens to be the auditing best practice checklist. You can use that in terms to help streamline the best practices in your environment and what's important to your corporate governance. PCI DSS, we're merchant level 1 compliant. And of course, national regulations, which everybody wants to know about. So if you just consider it from the US perspective, you're talking about anything from no guidance from our regulators to something from the FFIEC IT handbook, which was written in 2003. That's 12 years of innovation that has passed. But I can assure you in this space, even though there's some ambiguity to how do you apply these regulations to the environment of cloud when 12 years has passed, we actually just had an engagement last week in Europe, and I can tell you engaging with some of these regulators and their IT audit teams, it's almost exciting because the regulators that we spoke to, they knew everything we were talking about, and their questions to us were amazing. So and actually, let me take you back for a second. We did this engagement with one of our customers who's going all in on the cloud, and before I even got back to the United States, that regulator gave them the green light to start their process. So we're really excited for this customer, but what did we tell this regulator? That helped them understand what the customer wants to do and what they can do on AWS. So like I said, I'm a little bit of a compliance geek, so I'm gonna geek out a little bit on you. AWS Trusted Advisor is my favorite tool at AWS. When I saw this, I thought, we have to find a way to parlay this into just about every form of compliance possible. So for those of you who haven't used it, I'll give you a quick visualization. It is a console that's as simple as you see cost optimizing and performance, but more importantly, from a compliance perspective, you see security and fault tolerance. And it's as simple as you have a green section, a yellow section, and a red section. And the green section says, yes, you're following 13 of AWS's security best practices. The yellow section, yield, right? So you're partially following, let's say, 9 of these best practices. And then red is stop, obviously, which is you're, to the majority, not meeting some of the best practices. And why I like it for an auditing perspective is from an auditor, you click on it, and it tells you exactly why. So 8 of your 9 resources aren't logging. That's an important regulation right there in and of itself. If you look at most of the US regulations and some of them globally. And I think the auditors really appreciated that they could just walk in the door and take a look at that. AWS Identity Access Management, as just about everybody spoke about, it's important in terms of user groups and permissions, and that's embedded in a lot of the US regulations. Another console I love is AWS Config. The reason I like this one is because I think back in my days at the New York Stock Exchange, and I was there for the Facebook IPO on NASDAQ. And had they had this tool, they could have perhaps mitigated some of the circumstances that happened that morning where Facebook didn't quite open as planned. Perhaps they could have gone in and seen that there was a configuration change to their environment and been able to switch back quickly. And then, of course, workbooks. I'll touch on this quickly. One of the workbooks we have is the FFIEC Compliance on AWS. It's 66 pages, and I don't anticipate any of you are going to sit and go and read it right now in Vegas. But what I can tell you is this is a great tool for your auditing department, especially if they want to see how serious is AWS about compliance. This particular workbook goes over everything from how we meet, how you inherit our controls in terms of the FFIEC IT handbook, and it goes all the way down. It gets so granular that it tells you exactly which controls were tested as part of, say, ISO or PCI. It also speaks about best practices on the customer's part when there's controls for the customer. And then it also gives some guidance on your auditing departments on how they can test that particular control. And then what program is complete without training? Hopefully some of you have had the opportunity to take some of the auditing and security training on Quick Labs. But where are we going? Because we have to continue to innovate. So for governance, risk, and compliance, one of the things I can only briefly speak about, because I have been sworn to secrecy until tomorrow, from Tim Sandage and Chad are going to talk about security by design. I'll give you the session details in a few seconds. This is a proactive approach to security. You're going to love this, and your regulators are going to love this. So make sure you get ready to write that down in a few minutes. But let me tell you about the FFIEC audit guide. So I actually wrote 2 audit guides just before reInvent. One's called the FFIEC audit guide and the SEC Cybersecurity Initiative audit guide. And what these are a book for you to just hand to your auditors right now. I wrote it with auditors and regulators in mind. What this will do is at least give them some perspective into how are they going to approach your environment in terms of their own regulations. And I can tell you, I don't know a thing about API calls, but when I wrote this, I learned at it was just such an easy thing to do on AWS that I don't think for a second that every single one of your auditors can grasp this concept and do it incredibly easy. And then let me tell you about what we've done in the education space and training space. So June 3rd, we actually had our first test for a customer IT audit day. And it was such a great success. We actually had one of the largest financial services organizations, global at that, attend. And when I was actually looking for quotes on, what did they say about the training, how did they feel about it, I thought maybe I wrote this and sent it to myself because I thought it was just so convenient that they said this. But it says training would not only be helpful for technology, but for risk and compliance internal audit teams as well. So when we heard this message, the first thing we thought was we have to get this to everybody if this is how just such a large financial services organization feels. So on our security blog, I think we announced just a few days ago, there is a security fundamentals course. So you can it's 3 hours long. You can go to the AWS security blog and get the link straight for it. I encourage you to have all of your compliance people and your auditors take this because this gives them the great introduction that you need without you having to teach them yourself. And we're going to continue to expand that as well. And when we looked at not only do your auditors need it, but why wouldn't the regulators need it as well? So December 3rd, we're actually holding our first IT Auditor Day for the US regulators. We've already got a great commitment from a number of regulators, and I just really look forward to hearing their feedback and taking that even a step further. And I didn't drive this content. I think it's important that AWS not be the one who's speaking to the regulators, but I approached several of our customers, and they're building out the content. So it's going to be the customers essentially speaking directly to the US regulators. So as I mentioned, there's a number of complimentary compliance sessions here today. The first one, SEC 312, is going to be done by Tim and Chad to talk about security by design. If you do nothing else, I encourage you to go to that. And then, of course, my helpful resources for you. The risk and compliance white paper, I know it's 90-something pages long, but I assure you, pages 1 through 18 will be more than enough for your compliance department to really get the message across of what is AWS, how does the shared responsibility work, and what are the frequently asked questions that they're going to have for you that you can just head off right there in the workbook. I look forward to seeing most of you around reInvent, and I'll see you next term.